Fat girl begged, "Kill me, don't touch me." Mountain man whispered, "I'll die before I hurt you." The forest road was empty, but for the crunch of Penny Whitmore's boots against frozen earth. Dusk had already fallen, and the lantern she carried threw trembling shadows along the path. She hugged her shawl tighter around her soft frame, trying to ignore the echo of cruel laughter she'd endured all day at the shop. Men snickered behind her back. Boys whispered, "Too fat, too plain, no one will ever want her." She kept her chin down, wishing only to get home unseen. But she wasn't alone. From the darkness stepped Brutus Kane, broad-shouldered and grinning, flanked by two drunken companions. His boots crunched louder, cutting off her way. "Well, well," he sneered, "the fat girl walking home alone, maybe tonight's your lucky night." His friends laughed, circling like wolves. Penny's throat closed. She dropped her lantern and fell to her knees, snow soaking into her skirt. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking, "please kill me, just don't touch me." Her words silenced even the night air. The men blinked, surprised, then laughed louder, crueler. Kane crouched down, his shadow blotting out the lantern light. "Kill you? No, sweetheart. We're going to give you something you'll never forget." And then a crack of a branch. A shadow moved at the tree line. Jeremiah Blackstone stepped into the glow of the fallen lantern, towering, silent, rifle in hand. The locals called him the Ghost of Thunder Ridge, a man who'd walked away from civilization and never looked back. His blue eyes were cold steel, fixed on Kane. "Step away from her," he said. His voice was deep, unshakable. The forest held its breath. For the first time that night, Penny's heart felt something besides terror. Hope. Penny Whitmore had never fit in Cedar Falls. She had been born there, raised among its narrow streets and timber storefronts, but she might as well have been a stranger. At 24, she worked quietly in the bookshop on Main Street, stacking shelves, repairing bindings, and reading by the dim oil lamp long after customers had left. She loved words, the way stories carried her out of her own skin and into worlds where heroines were cherished, where no one laughed at the curve of their bodies. But Cedar Falls was merciless. Every trip to the market, every step across the boardwalk, meant enduring whispers. "That one? Too big for any man. Spinster before 30. Mark my words." When she walked past the saloon, men called after her, their laughter sharp as broken glass. Penny had learned to keep her head low, to gather her shawl around her as if it might shield her from their eyes. Her parents had died young, leaving her with the tiny cottage on the outskirts. Alone, she scraped by, pouring herself into the comfort of books, baking simple bread, and dreaming of a life where she could be seen for more than her size. Yet, deep down, the cruel voices had carved their truth into her heart. She believed she was unwanted, unlovable. Jeremiah Blackstone's story was the opposite, one of too much love lost. He had once been a man of the city, a civil engineer whose name carried weight on maps and ledgers. But tragedy had burned his world to ash. A house fire, an accident no one could have prevented, had taken his wife and infant daughter. He had buried them with his own hands before disappearing into the mountains. For 6 years he had lived on Thunder Ridge, a vast wilderness of pine, snow-melt streams, and jagged cliffs. The town called him the Ghost, the Hermit, the Madman. Children whispered that he could kill a bear with his bare hands. Adults swore he had gone savage. None of them knew the truth. He had chosen solitude to keep his broken heart from shattering altogether. The night he found Penny, he saw more than a terrified woman on her knees. He saw himself, alone, cast aside, convinced the world had no use for her. The words she had cried, begging for death rather than defilement, struck him deeper than any bullet. He remembered standing in his burning home, praying to die rather than live with what he had lost. When Cain and his men fled into the darkness at the crack of his rifle, Jeremiah approached slowly, careful not to frighten her further. Even then, Penny's body shrank in on itself, as if expecting cruelty from every hand, even his. He had knelt so she would not have to look up at him, and sworn in a voice that did not tremble, "I'll die before I hurt you." By the time he walked her to her little cottage, keeping his distance, he already knew this woman had changed the course of his exile. He had promised only to see her safe, but in the silence of his heart, he knew he could not walk away. The path back to Penny's cottage wound through thick forest, where the lantern's glow flickered against snow-dusted branches. Jera walked a few paces behind, his long strides easy, yet his presence was unmistakable, like a wall of stone between her and the world. Penny's heart thudded in her chest. She had never been so near a man like him, tall, broad, silent, moving with a predator's grace. Every few steps she glanced over her shoulder as if to confirm he was still there. His eyes, blue and sharp as winter sky, met hers only briefly before turning outward, scanning the woods. She realized with a start that he wasn't watching her. He was watching for danger. They reached the edge of her cottage yard, a small plot of frozen earth surrounded by a crooked fence. Penny fumbled with her key, her hands trembling. "You don't have to come any further," she whispered, her voice uneven. "I'll be fine." Jera's answer was quiet, but firm. "They'll come back. Men like Cain don't take humiliation lightly." Fear prickled across her skin. She wanted to argue, to insist she could manage alone, but the memory of Cain's laughter silenced her. At last she nodded. "Then stay if you must, but please don't come inside." He inclined his head, accepting without offense. "I'll make camp under the oak. If anything stirs, I'll hear it." That night, Penny lay awake listening to the muffled crackle of his campfire outside. For the first time in years, she did not feel entirely alone. The days that followed unfolded with a fragile rhythm. Jera kept his promise, patrolling the woods each dawn and dusk. Sometimes Penny caught him stacking firewood neatly by her door or leaving snares of rabbit meat where she would find them. He asked for nothing in return. One afternoon, snow began to fall heavy and wet. Penny stepped outside with a loaf of bread in her hands, cheeks pink from the cold. "You'll freeze out here if you don't eat," she said, thrusting it toward him. He took it carefully, as though accepting a gift of great worth. "Thank you." His gaze lingered on her, steady but not demanding. She felt warmth rise to her cheeks and turned quickly back to the cottage. That night, as the storm thickened, her chimney clogged with snow. Smoke began to choke the room. Before she could panic, the door swung open and Jera strode inside, lifting her into the snow-chilled air before she could protest. He set her gently down outside, then climbed onto the roof to clear the flue. When he returned, soot-streaked and breathless, Penny clutched her shawl tight. "You shouldn't have," she began. He cut her off softly. "Better a sooty coat than your grave." Her heart twisted. No man had ever spoken of her life as something worth saving. From then on, she no longer asked him to stay away. At first he kept to his tent, but when the storm deepened and his fire threatened to die, she found herself opening the door. "You can sleep by the hearth tonight," she murmured, not meeting his eyes. Inside, he spread his bedroll near the fire, giving her space, saying little, but the silence was no longer uncomfortable. As she lay awake, she could hear his steady breathing, a sound that soothed her fears more than any prayer. In those nights between storm and dawn, something unspoken passed between them. Penny began to see him not as a phantom of the woods, but as a man scarred by grief, guarding her not out of pity, but out of a promise he seemed determined to keep. And Jera, watching her stir the fire, watching her read aloud by candlelight, felt a warmth he thought buried forever in the ashes of his past. By the time winter clenched the valley in its fist, the line between Jera's camp and Penny's cottage blurred until it vanished altogether. He had meant to remain outside, a shadowy guardian in the yard, but Penny could not bear to see him endure the bitter nights. One evening, when the wind howled like wolves, she opened the door wide. "Please," she said softly, her cheeks flushed with both cold and hesitation. "Stay inside. There's room by the hearth." Jera studied her face, searching for fear, for reluctance. When he saw only quiet resolve, he nodded once. "Only if you're sure." Thus began their life together, though neither dared to name it as such. The cabin became a world of two hearts slowly learning to trust. Jerry rose at dawn to split logs, his axe striking with sure rhythm, while Penny baked coarse bread in the oven, the scent filling the air with warmth. She insisted on cooking meals, though her hands trembled the first time she placed a plate before him. "You should eat first," she murmured, almost apologetic. But he pushed the dish back toward her. "Ladies before soldiers," he said simply, and refused to touch his food until she had taken the first bite. Little by little, the walls Penny had built around herself cracked. She began to hum while kneading dough, unaware that Jerry listened intently, his rough features softened by something like wonder. When she read aloud from one of her treasured books in the evening, her voice low and melodic, he closed his eyes, letting the sound soothe wounds no medicine ever had. He, too, gave pieces of himself. One afternoon, while mending the roof, he invited her to climb the ladder and hand him nails. Her heart pounded at the thought, but his steady presence steadied her trembling hands. When she slipped, he caught her wrist, not gripping, but holding just enough to keep her safe. He released her the moment her footing returned. "You're stronger than you think," he told her, as if it were a fact carved in stone. At night, the storm raged outside, but inside the cabin a quiet intimacy bloomed. Jerry sat carving wood by the firelight, his massive hands surprisingly deft, while Penny stitched patches into his worn shirts. Sometimes their hands brushed when exchanging tools, a spark lingering long after. Penny, once ashamed of her body, began to forget her fears under his gaze. When she apologized for needing a second slice of bread, he frowned gently. "Eat, Penny. You've been half-starved too long. You deserve more than scraps." The way he said it, firm, unyielding, made her throat tighten with tears she could not explain. One evening, when she laughed at one of his dry remarks, she clapped a hand over her mouth, embarrassed, but Jerry leaned closer, his voice rough but tender. "Don't hide that. Your laughter, it brings this cabin alive." She turned away quickly, yet her heart glowed brighter than the fire. As days turned to weeks, they fell into unspoken harmony. Penny swept the floor and tended to the hens Jerry had once nearly neglected. Jerry repaired the rocking chair so she could sit by the window with her books. He taught her how to recognize animal tracks in the snow, her breath visible as they walked side by side through the woods. When her steps faltered, he slowed his long stride without comment, as though it had always been his pace. Once, after a day of chores, Penny caught sight of herself in the mirror above her mother's old dresser. Her reflection startled her, rosy-cheeked, eyes bright, a woman not weighed down by shame, but lifted by care. For the first time, she saw what Jerry must have seen all along. That night, she dared to ask, her voice trembling, "Why do you look at me that way?" Jerry set aside the piece of wood he had been carving, his gaze steady. "Because you're worth looking at, because you're more than you've ever been told." Tears spilled silently down her cheeks, but for once they were not born of sorrow. Outside, the blizzard howled, but within the cabin something rare and precious had begun to take root, a fragile bond woven from bread shared, fires stoked, and words spoken softly in the dark. Neither called it love yet, but both felt it growing, as inevitable as spring after the long winter. The peace of winter could not last forever. Rumors have long legs in small towns, and soon Cedar Falls buzzed with whispers. The fat Whitmore girl had not vanished into the snow, but was living with the ghost of Thunder Ridge. Penny heard it first at the general store when she ventured down with Jerry for supplies. The shopkeeper's wife leaned across the counter and whispered too loudly, "Imagine that brute taking her in. What would a man like him want with a girl like her?" Laughter followed, sharp as knives. Penny's face burned, and she clutched her basket tighter, desperate to flee. Jerry's jaw hardened. He set a silver coin on the counter with deliberate force. "We'll take the flour, and the gossip you can keep." His voice was calm, but carried steel. He walked Penny out with a protective hand hovering near her back, not touching, but shielding all the same. That night by the fire, Penny sat silent, her eyes downcast. "They're right," she whispered. "You've ruined your reputation by taking me in. People will think the worst." Jerry leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "Let them. Their words don't touch me, and they shouldn't touch you. You are not what they say." But words cut deep, and Penny's old wounds bled anew. She avoided his eyes, wondering if he would one day see her through the same cruel lens. As if gossip weren't enough, another shadow crept closer. Brutus Kane had not forgotten his humiliation. Rumors reached Jerry that Kane was gathering men, boasting in saloons that he'd take back what the ghost stole. The sheriff of Cedar Falls, a man more coward than lawman, looked the other way. Meanwhile, Penny uncovered Jerry's own secret. One stormy afternoon, she found him at his workbench, staring at a small locket. Inside was a miniature portrait of a woman and child. The paint faded, but the faces clear. "Your family?" Penny asked softly. Jerry closed the locket, his expression darkening. "My wife and daughter, lost them in the fire." He turned away, shoulders rigid. "I couldn't save them. I should have saved them." Penny reached out, her hand trembling as it hovered near his arm. "You can't carry that weight forever, Jerry. You've saved me. Doesn't that mean something?" His silence stretched long, broken only by the crackle of the fire. At last he said, low and rough, "It means everything, but I don't deserve forgiveness." Penny's heart ached. She realized they were two broken souls, each convinced of their unworthiness, each blind to their own worth, but not to the other's. The test came sooner than either expected. One evening, while Jerry was away checking his snares, Penny heard the crunch of boots outside the cabin. Her blood froze. The door burst open, and Brutus Kane swaggered in, 3 men at his back. "Well, look at you," Kane sneered, "living like a wife in his little den. Did you really think you'd be safe here?" Penny's knees trembled, but something within her snapped taut. She straightened, meeting his gaze with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "You'll never touch me. Not now, not ever." Kane laughed. "We'll see about that." He reached for her, and Jer's voice thundered from the doorway. "Step away from her." Rifle raised, eyes blazing, the cabin, once sanctuary, became battleground. The cabin's warmth vanished, replaced by a biting chill sharper than the winter wind. Kane stood in the center of the room, his hand still half raised toward Penny, but froze when Jer's rifle leveled at his chest. "I warned you once," Jerry said, voice low and steady. "You don't get another chance." Kane sneered, waving his men forward. "You won't shoot with the lady here. We'll take her, and your precious little fortress, too." The 3 thugs advanced. Jerry stepped into the cabin fully, positioning himself between them and Penny. His broad frame filled the doorway, his shadow stretching across the floorboards like a shield. "Penny," he said without looking back, "the shotgun under the bed." Her pulse hammered, but she moved. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, to curl small and vanish. Instead, she crawled beneath the bed, fingers brushing cold steel. When she rose, shotgun clutched to her chest, Kane barked a laugh. "The fat girl thinks she can fight?" The insult stung, but Penny lifted the weapon, her hands trembling yet firm. "I won't let you hurt him, or me." For the first time, Kane's smirk faltered. What followed was chaos. One man lunged, and Jerry fired. Wood splintered, smoke filled the air, and the attacker dropped. Another swung a knife, but Penny, heart in her throat, pulled the shotgun's trigger. The blast rocked the room, throwing the man back into the wall. Kane cursed, ducking behind the overturned table. "You'll regret this, Blackstone." He fired wildly, the bullet grazing Jerry's arm. Jerry grunted, but stood firm, eyes locked on Kane. It ended in a flash of steel and fury. Jerry closed the distance, knocking the revolver from Kane's hand, slamming him against the wall. Snow swirled in through the shattered window as Jerry pressed the rifle barrel beneath Kane's chin. "One more breath toward her, and it'll be your last." For a long moment, only Kane's ragged breathing filled the silence. Then boots pounded outside, the sheriff and his men, drawn by the gunfire at last. They burst into the cabin, weapons raised. The sight before them was clear. Kane disarmed, his men wounded, Penny standing pale but unshaken, with the shotgun still smoking. Sheriff Harding blinked, then turned his gaze on Jerry. "Looks like the lady and her mountain ghost did your job for you," Jerry said coldly. Kane was dragged out in shackles, spitting threats. But Penny heard none of it. Her ears roared with her heartbeat, her whole body trembling. Jerry lowered his rifle and turned to her, his expression softening. "You stood your ground," he murmured. "I knew you had it in you." Tears spilled down Penny's cheeks, not of fear, but of fierce relief. She whispered, "I wasn't brave. I was terrified." Jerry brushed a lock of hair from her face with the gentlest touch. "That's what courage is, Penny. Being terrified and standing anyway." The cabin was quiet again, though the walls still bore scars of the fight. Splintered wood, shattered glass, the smell of gunpowder lingering in the air. Outside, the sheriff's posse led Kane and his men down the snowy trail, their curses fading into the distance. Inside, Jerry bound the cut on his arm with a strip of cloth, wincing only slightly. Penny hovered near, her hands trembling as she tried to help. "You're hurt because of me," she whispered. He caught her wrists gently, steadying her. "No," he said firmly. "I fought because of you. There's a difference. You gave me a reason." She swallowed hard, unable to look away from his eyes. In their blue depths, she saw no mockery, no pity, only truth. "Jerry," she breathed, tears welling, "I don't know what I'd be without you." He brushed his thumb across her knuckles, his voice low and tender. "Safe. That's what you are now. Safe here. If you'll have it, this can be your home." Her tears spilled freely then, not of sorrow, but of something far richer. She nodded, unable to speak, and pressed her forehead against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her as though she were the most precious thing the world had ever given him. The fire crackled, casting golden light across their entwined figures. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering every scar of violence in a soft, white blanket. Yet, as Penny closed her eyes against the steady beat of Jerry's heart, one question lingered in the hush of the cabin. Would their love be enough to withstand the world beyond Thunder Ridge, a world still cruel and watchful? The answer, perhaps, lay in the strength of the arms that held her. Stories like Penny and Jerry's remind us that even in the darkest nights, compassion can light a fire strong enough to melt fear and shame. Every kind word, every act of courage can change the course of a life. I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Share your thoughts in the comments, because every story grows brighter when hearts connect across distances. And if you still believe love can heal wounds deeper than scars, stay close. The next story I tell may be the one meant for you.